The Exorcist received a prequel in 2004, but this was actually the second of two completed versions of the same film by different directors. Today we're going to discuss both Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion Prequel to The Exorcist. Welcome everyone to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, and joining me as always is Tim.
I got nothing clever to say today.
That's not a today problem, Tim. That's an everyday problem. This is a horror movie podcast. We get together, we talk about a horror movie we watched. It's quite that simple. Although, this one's not actually as simple as that, because we're doing kind of two movies today, although they're very, very heavily related. So, we've been doing the Exorcist franchise. We did the original, we did 2, we did 3, and we're here now to do the prequel. But there's an asterisk here because there's 2 of them.
What?
Well, I'll get into it in a second. I mean, obviously, we'll start spoiler free for the 2 of them and give some thoughts and comparisons, and then get into it. But so we'll start spoiler free. So basically, the gist of the history of this is that
the history, if you will.
They were making a prequel to The Exorcist, and they hired.
That sounds good so far.
Paul Schrader to direct the film.
America's sweetheart.
Yeah, people might know him as the writer of Taxi Driver. He, about 5 years ago, wrote and directed a movie called First Reformed, also about a priest, funnily enough, which was very good. That was a solid movie. And so was Taxi Driver, obviously, but I assumed I didn't have to tell people that Taxi Driver was good, because most people know that's good.
Yeah.
But so he directed this movie, right, which ended up being called Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. But the studio, once they saw that the rough cut, said, "Oh, we don't like this. This isn't exciting enough. This is too dull. We need more action and whiz bam and Hollywood shenanigans." So they effectively hired Renny Harlin, the director of Die Hard 2 and Deep Blue Sea, to just remake the movie.
And Nightmare on Elm Street 4, I believe.
That's true, yes. Maybe that's more relevant, being a horror podcast, I admit. But he, effectively remade the movie, but with a different script, so it got rewritten as well. So we have this really unique case where it's not that there's just a slightly different cut of the movie. It was made again, and the version that came out in 2004 was the second version. It was Exorcist the Beginning, which is the one directed by Renny Harlin. Both versions star Stellan Skarsgård. There's a couple of small roles that are in both, but there's a lot of roles that are different in each. It doesn't. I mean, the theatrically released one, The Beginning, doesn't use any footage almost of the original version. I think there was maybe one shot I noticed might have been reused, but otherwise it was completely reshot.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised rewatching this, because I had thought that, to my recollection, I thought that it was 2 different movies, but it was using a lot of the same, actors and ideas and stuff, just from 2 different directors kind of going about it. So,
but you probably didn't watch them back to back last time you saw them, right? I assume.
Yeah. So it was kind of surprising watching them pretty close to each other and be like, no, these are 2 completely different things.
It's kind of wild. So we'll get into all that stuff, obviously. So after The Beginning came out and it was critically panned, right? We'll give our thoughts on it in a minute, but it was very much hated at the time by everyone. The following year, the studio decided to let Paul Schrader finish his version, so they could put it out as a home video. They could do a 2-disc special edition where you get both versions of the movie, kind of thing. So
it's just a shame that Twitter wasn't around back then to get the Schrader Bros really riled up.
Yeah, the Schrader cut. So they released that version, although there is some caveats. They didn't give him much money to finish post-production, so they couldn't ADR any of the lines of dialogue. The visual effects that were kind of there are presumably just this unfinished, really bad CG that was supposed to have more work done to them, but they just didn't have the money to do any more to it. Luckily,
and they did actually make him perform a real exorcism. which was kind of weird, but
yeah, very funny, very funny. They weren't given money to like hire a composer, but there's kind of a score, but it's from like multiple sources. Like some of it's from the composer from the Twin Peaks stuff, and then there's like a band who do some of the stuff towards the end of the movie, and it's kind of like a hodgepodge of like things. They had to reuse some of the score from the theatrical movie that obviously this director wanted nothing to do with. So that's the backstory to this. There was a movie made, the studio didn't want it, they hired a new director to completely remake it from scratch, and that's the version that came out. It was hated. They gave the original director the money to at least finish editing the original film, but not much else to do anything else with it, and then released that as kind of like a home video release a year later.
Like the crazy thing about this is like I can see like something like this happening with, for example, Justice League, because that is a huge thing, and comic book movies make so much money. That's like, billion-dollar characters and franchises, and people are so up in arms about the different cuts and all that crap that, it's kind of understandable why, that gets like the two different versions. This, like, did anyone care about a prequel to The Exorcist? Was anyone really beating the drums for oh man, this is a story that's been waiting to be told? Well,
I think there's a few factors you have to look at it. I think you have to remember this is a time when releasing like special edition DVDs and stuff was a big deal, right? And they sold a lot of copies. And I think the other thing you have to look at,
miss those times.
You have to look at is that at this time, I presume that to just kind of get a reasonably finished version of that original film probably cost a lot less than putting the Snyder Cut together with all of its effects with a cost,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So it would have been a much cheaper thing to do. And I think the third thing you probably have to consider is that because everyone hated the beginning, this was their way to sell the DVD a year later. This was like, oh, you buy it, you get the other version, which you think might be really good. You think, oh, this one that the studio said no to. It's this, it's not even. It's the sort of thing that normally, like, you'd expect like 20 years to pass, 30 years, and be like, oh, this lost cut or this lost edit of a film that fans have been wanting for decades has finally been uncovered. But it's not. It's a year later, and it was it was still pretty fresh. But I can see that being the idea, is that we're going to put out like a version with both. I think they released it on its own as well. I think you could buy them individually, but I assume that was part of the, if not just a 2-pack, I suspect that there was an Exorcist box set with all 5 movies, and that was like, hey, we'll make you rebuy the first movie again because you'll get this 5th secret movie that was made and discarded.
Well, I mean, obviously it would have been released much later, but I have the Blu-ray set for Exorcist, and it does come with like 2 separate discs for each one. Oh sure, yeah.
In fact, that was probably the main thing. Actually, it was probably less that there was just a 2-disc version with beginning. It was probably more a way to resell the entire franchise again, because you get this 5th secret movie along with it. Because that's what they used to always do. They used to always do new box sets of like franchises that they'd already done, but they'd have that one new extra, that one new cut of just one of the movies, so that the super fans would just be like, shit, I have to buy this now because I need all of it.
And then what I thought was kind of interesting is that for the beginning I did have to bust out my Blu-ray sets to watch it that way, but then Dominion was like streaming everywhere. It was on like Peacock and Tubi. It was like you couldn't get away from Dominion.
that is actually really weird and kind of interesting, and it's probably not a choice. It's probably more just like a coincidence than it is like like an actual choice to like, oh, let's push this one more now. Because I don't think Warner Brothers or anyone involved gives a shit about pushing either of them. Like, it's not like Dominion came out and it was like heralded as this like, oh my god, they made a huge blunder and this was a classic. It kind of came out and got mixed reviews, better than beginning, but still pretty, middling at best. So no one's got fond memories of either of these, not really.
No,
I'd never seen them though. This was the first time I watched both of them, so this was
interesting.
This was well, because the reviews were so bad at the time, I had no interest in seeing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think even at the time though, I would say like in this 2000s period, I was pretty much watching everything between like, just being someone who liked to go to the movies and then also working at a Blockbuster and just having like every new movie to rent like every weekend that I feel like there was like not many things that I, especially like horror wise, not a lot that I missed during this time period.
Yeah, I think I just didn't. Again, like what you said, like who cares about an Exorcist prequel? Like I just didn't see the point. It felt like and this was before we were sick of like legacy sequels and requels and all these things that we're sick of now. This was before all that, and I still kind of looked at this and went, like, what's the point of this? Like, I don't like, because at the time as well, I think I'd only seen Exorcist 2 as far as the sequels were going. So in my head, I was like, everything related to this that isn't the first movie is completely pointless. Like, why are we doing any of it? Obviously 3's pretty good, and the TV show was pretty surprisingly solid. So there are good examples of like non-Exorcist, one Exorcist stuff, but
For sure. Yeah.
there's definitely more bad than good, I would say.
Oh yeah.
But that said, so like, that's the weird like backstory to this. So we'll discuss what the actual differences are in a minute. We'll do a little bit of that in spoiler free, then probably get into it heavily in spoilers. But the basic gist of the movies, and this is again the interesting thing about comparing them, is that the broad strokes are kind of there. It's not like when they went to write the new version for Renny Harlin to direct, it's not like they completely threw out all the concepts. They just sort of like reshaped some things, took some characters out. Like, they're still unearthing this old church in the desert that, you know, it's kind of older than it should be, and it's probably got something related to do with the demon and all that. Like, that bare bones is still there. The idea that Stellan Skarsgård playing Father Merrin, like a young version of Father Merrin from the first movie, is lost his faith because of what he went through during World War II, and, you know, a little bit before that, you know, basically because during the Nazis. And those bare bones are in both versions, but what's so fascinating about it is, and this is like a very unique opportunity to just see how a different version of the script and a different director drastically changes just how certain scenes play out, and like where they play out in the movie, and like how they're presented. Like, it is kind of fascinating from that perspective. So I'll just be upfront with this. Exorcist at the beginning is boring trash. I was so like I was ready to pass out. I was struggling to pay attention. And Dominion's not a good movie. It's not even that much better, really, but it is better than the beginning. And I think, like, right from the opening scene, which is a direct different version of a scene that's in the beginning, I went, this is definitely better directed than the beginning is. Like, it's definitely has a bit more build to it. Overall, the movie doesn't feel that way, though. I'd say that the movie does kind of feel like a dull drama a lot of the time. So I get why the studio didn't like it. The more Hollywoodized thing they got instead, though, is even worse. But you know, that's we'll get into all the specifics. But how do you feel about beginning in Dominion?
So I think I've seen these twice before. Like, once when they both came out, and then I think at some point, like, I did like, for October, like an Exorcist like rewatch or whatever. But I really had no memory of these, because I probably the last time I watched it, like you were saying, they're kind of dull that I wasn't paying that much attention. So I did have a vague memory of like maybe kind of liking these when they first came out, and like I don't know if it was just, I don't know, like maybe I was like trying to be contrarian in my younger days, and everyone's like saying they suck, and I'm like, no, actually there's like some interesting ideas here or whatever. But watching them now, no, I think they totally suck. I'll agree with you though. Like I feel like the Renny Harlin one like is, I would say the weaker one. There's like some cheesy stuff at the end that I actually kind of like don't mind, like when kind of like, I don't know, like there's this like final battle in a cave that I'm like, this is dumb and cheesy, but at least I don't know, stuff is kind of happening and it's a little more exciting to watch. But they just I mean, first of all, there's really no need to do like, a prequel to The Exorcist.
Not at all.
Especially something that's like so like wildly out of tone. Like, this feels like, I guess it's kind of in one place, but it does feel like a globetrotting, like Indiana Jones kind of movie where, like archaeologists, like, digging for artifacts and all this stuff, like, which is not the tone really like you kind of want for an Exorcist movie. Which, I mean, I say that, but I guess the third one is kind of a different tone, and that one worked really well, but whatever. It also just kind of reeks of like, you know, early mid 2000s, which I don't think was like the greatest point for filmmaking.
No, certainly not horror.
Yeah.
I would say, well, American horror. Asian horror was doing great at this time, but American horror not as much.
Yeah, and you can see, like, especially in the beginning, like, you know, a lot of those like bad tropes from the time, like bad CGI, jump scares.
Especially in the beginning, the Renny Harlin version, like, absolutely, there's some abysmal CG, and it doesn't have the benefit of the other version where there's a little bit of bad CG, but at least it's like, okay, I know this is unfinished though because they didn't have the money to finish it. Like, there's some CG, like, just like landscapes at the start of the Renny Harlin one that I was gobsmacked at, and then that was nothing compared to when the hyenas showed up.
Yes. Yeah.
Holy shit, these CG God. Hyenas. I feel embarrassed watching this.
Yeah. Which kind of sucks because I do like the idea of the hyenas. Like, I like whenever you're dealing with movies about like possessed people or like evil little kids, I always like when they have kind of like either like control over animals or like animal protectors and stuff. So there was some like the idea of some hyena stuff could have been cool, but yeah, it's not worth it to have just that horrible dog shit CGI. And you know, the other thing that's kind of funny too is like I kept thinking like, all right, well, one of these is going to be like the more like streamlined kind of cleaned up version, so it'll probably be shorter. Like, so hopefully at least one of these will be like 90 minutes or something.
Oh no,
they're both like 2 hours.
Yeah, I died a little inside when I started the beginning. I was like, oh my god, this is like basically 2 full hours. And like a minute into it, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to check the other one. I want to see how long the Dominion is. And I was like, oh shit, it's basically the same length. Are you kidding me? I need to watch 4 hours of this crap today. Yeah, which is actually one of the questions I had before I started. Is I was debating which order to watch them in, because part of me was like, do I watch Dominion first because that was made first, or do I do the experience of what it was like to actually watch them coming out because beginning came out? And that's what I decided in the end, was that I'll do that one first and then get the hopefully slightly better one second. Which again, like I think the opening scene in the Schrader version and Dominion is a solid opening scene, and it's definitely better than the kind of the quick snippets you get of his backstory in the Renny Harlin version.
Oh right, yeah. It's kind of funny how that was a much bigger deal in the other version.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously there's some characters. There's a lot of characters who have like counterparts in the other movie, but they don't necessarily. But they don't all have counterparts. There's for example, there's a young disabled man in Schrader's version in Dominion, which is not in Renny Harlin's version, and he's a pretty big prominent part in Dominion.
Oh yeah, it's like a main character pretty much.
Yeah, there's a kind of a British major who's in both versions, but he he's there at the start in both, but he comes into the story at very different times later on in the film in both versions. And in Dominion, he's got like a second in command, a captain or whatever the other guy's rank is, who kind of also becomes a big character in the back half of the movie. So there's differences. There's like a sleazy like guy who runs the dig site in the first movie, in the beginning, I should say, who's not in Dominion at all. There's just one big difference with Skarsgård himself, Father Merrin, is that in the beginning he's like basically forced to go to this dig site, and it's already started without him, and he's kind of like brought in because there might be some religious artifacts there. In Dominion, when we meet him, he's the one who started the digging, and he's been taken away from it to be asked about it, and then he's going back to it. So there's like all just, there's these different dynamics for the characters. One of the big things that I would say really sticks out to me is just like when I say that the beginning's more Hollywood and more sort of like whiz bang, it's not just that there's more like over the top horror scenes. It's that, so in both movies, Father Merrin's thing, much like in the original Exorcist, he's got a bit of a crisis of faith where because of what happened with the Nazis, because of what he saw and what he had to do to survive, he's given up his faith. He's lost his faith in God. Right? And in the beginning, they
it's
have
kind of like the I believe is it Spider-Man 50 where he throws his Spider-Man costume in the trash and walks away, says I'll be Spider-Man no more. There's actually a deleted scene where he throws his priest robes into a trash can and just starts walking away saying I don't believe in God anymore.
Exorcist no more. Oh, technically it wasn't an exorcist before this. This is how he becomes an exorcist. He was just a priest before.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in the beginning, he it's said repeatedly, that he's not a priest anymore. Like they have to point it out in the dialogue 100 times. I felt like in the first 20 minutes of the movie, where he keeps saying, "Oh, Father Merrin's no, it's just Mr. Merrin," and there's constant dialogue sort of telling you. Whereas in the Paul Schrader version, Dominion, it just kind of presents him and you just kind of get it. He does eventually talk about it when he's opening up to someone, but that happens 25 minutes in. You could really tell in the Hollywood version, if you will, in the beginning, that he really has they have to beat you over the head with it in the script. Whereas in the Dominion film, it's allowed to just sort of be there as almost, I won't even say subtext, but it's just it's allowed to sit there and let the audience kind of just sort of realize it before they eventually bring it up and talk about it. I think because in the more Hollywood version, they probably want you to think that he can have sex if he wants. Hey, just to remind you, he might. Some priests can have sex. Not all of them aren't allowed to.
I didn't realize you're such an expert. But yeah, especially with his the nurse or whoever he seems to be quite chumly with. You want the audience to believe that these two could bang at any moment. Which is always a good barometer for any movie.
I missed all that, but I'll assume whatever you said was gold.
I was just talking about how they want the audience to believe that him and that nurse can bang at any moment.
Oh yeah, we have very different nurses in both movies, and their stories go in wildly different places, which is more spoiler territory than it isn't. So we'll leave that for now. But
and don't worry, we will rank them by attractiveness. Just let us get
there. Tim does not speak for the show or myself or Male Fuzz Movies as an entity. Just let that be known. Oh, there is actually something to mention here on their physical appearance, just in the sense that it does kind of feel like when they were casting the new version of the character for the more Hollywood version, because they literally cast a Bond girl, because I looked her up and she was in GoldenEye, I think. So, but
the video game or
the movie, Tim?
Okay, I don't know.
You really think the N64 game that had blocky pixels had a proper actress doing mocap in a performance?
It could have. I don't
know. But she, it does kind of feel like, we want someone who's a bit more of a traditional Hollywood blonde.
Yeah.
I mean, she's don't get me wrong. Obviously she's a bit more age appropriate for Skarsgård's character, so she's slightly older than what you'd maybe get in another type of movie, but it does kind of feel like they went from a sort of more refined character to we want her to be sexier. So yeah. I'm not saying she's necessarily more attractive. This is not my opinion, but I can sort of see the Hollywood cynicism at play of no, get us a blonde for the second version.
We want the audience to want to possess her as much as Pazuzu does.
So yeah, it's really weird. As soon as I started watching the second movie, I was kind of this is kind of interesting comparing them now. Admittedly, that feeling of being interested did kind of go away after about 20 minutes when I was okay, I've got another hour and 40 minutes of this, and I'm not that interested that I want to watch a different version of the same movie that I just watched again. But
are you happier or sadder that we were doing it as one episode, or do you think it would have been nicer to have 2 episodes?
No, I think this is better. I think because they're so comparable, I feel like the second episode would just be us comparing, and which arguably is what we're going to mostly do in this anyway, but at least we're not being forced to have a conversation about the beginning on its own where we have to try and Like, this is going to be a slightly different conversation than normal. It's a slightly different review, just because of the nature of what this is.
Oh, cheeky.
It's a cheeky comparison episode. I don't know. Yeah. So there's like a younger.
What did you have for lunch today?
I can't remember.
Okay, it wasn't supposed to be a hard question, but
I don't remember. I had bran flakes for breakfast.
Brom flakes.
Bran flakes.
Brahms.
Not bran flakes. Shut up. Nothing to do with the boy.
You know, it's funny, if I may tangent for a second, there's on the little corner of the table where I sit, where I do my work, because I work from home. I always hear this like scratching in the walls, and we have some pest control come by every so often to like check under the house and stuff. And so we had a guy come, and he did his check-in stuff, and then he left, and then as soon as he left, I started hearing the scratching again. I just started thinking, like, I wonder if I have a boy in my walls.
I'm just imagining you sitting at the edge of like the dining table with your laptop, just sort of hunched up in the corner. You're not allowed to like interact with like the wife or the kid. You just... Also, why are you working anywhere else? You've got an office.
Yeah.
You're literally sitting in your office with a desk. Why aren't you working in here?
It's just a lot of cat hair and cats.
Oh, one would think having an office in your home would be a place for peace and quiet to get on with work.
One would think that. But it's pretty much been taken over by the cats. It's just litter everywhere. It smells, hair just wafting in the wind.
Oh, it's good to get a nice sense of what you're smelling and feeling every time we record a podcast. You're just like, yeah, this is the aura that you associate with it.
Oh yeah, no, it's torture in many different ways, but it's essentially my penance. Like, I'm like the that albino guy from Da Vinci Code. Like, this is how I, what do you call it? Flagellate or whatever.
Let's quickly move on from that statement. So yeah, I will say on the visual style of the movies, obviously they're even different aspect ratios. The Renny Harlin ones, the wider, more cinematic. One of the interesting details I noticed when I was reading up on the production is that when they did the Dominion cut, right, when they went in to like finish that version, they weren't allowed to get the cinematographer back to color grade the film, so the director and the editor just had to sort of kind of wing it and do it themselves. And I think looking at the movie, you can kind of tell in a way, because not that it should have looked like the other version, but it definitely looks a bit more like a low-key drama most of the time.
Sure.
It looks a bit more, I don't want to say made for TV. That's maybe a bit harsh, because it feels bigger than that production wise. But just the visual look to the film does feel a bit more understated. Whereas when you watch the Renny Harlin one, there's a lot more sort of dramatic lighting. There's a lot more shadows. Like it does feel color timed. It feels like a lot of work went in post production to giving it a look. So, and not all of that's necessarily a good thing. Like, the cheesy like CG flashbacks at the start and things like that are obviously look like shit, but you can kind of tell there's more polish on that version, even though otherwise it is definitely the worst version in just about every way. That is the one maybe thing that you could say just on an objective level is better about it, is that it did clearly get more time in post to actually do what every other movie does in post, basically. Whereas the footage on Dominion feels a bit more kind of raw, I suppose. It's a bit more just like, okay, this is all we can do is put it together, and that's about it.
Yeah. It's as good as it gets.
Yeah. Do you have anything else spoiler-free wise you want to bring up?
I did think both movies probably would have been better in 3D, just to really get that sense of, the terror coming right at you. But I guess it's fine to watch it in 2D.
What the hell are you talking about? I have to deal with a cat, and I come back to you saying it's fine to watch it in 2D. What the hell are you on about?
I was just talking about, how probably would have been a little better in 3D.
Let's move right on from that comment. That's my new catchphrase. You notice that? That's the second time I dropped that today. Yeah, so we'll give spoilers for both movies then. So that's Exorcist the beginning and Dominion prequel to The Exorcist.
Very different things. One is the beginning of the Exorcist series. The other is a prequel to it. So...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Exorcist the Beginning is a very generic title for a prequel. It's just the title plus the beginning. Dominion on its own is a better title. I feel like adding the subtitle of a prequel to The Exorcist kind of robs it of any class that it might have otherwise had.
Agreed.
But, whatever. That's where we are. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like, like, the discussion of this is going to be more about comparing the differences between the two than it is about, like, going through each one kind of on its own. And I think part of that as well is just to save us from, like, because much like watching the
Honestly,
movies back
I don't give a shit about the story. I don't think it's very good.
That's fair. Well, let's talk about one of the big things that happens in the beginning that was laughably bad. Other than the CGI hyenas, which showed up a few times, is the twist of who the possessed person is, because you don't really know there's a possessed person for most of the movie, kind of, but there's a twist in Act 3 that the nurse that he's been kind of flirting with and been getting close to has been possessed this whole time. But not only has she been possessed this whole time, that she was actually married to the SS officer that murdered people in front of him in his backstory.
Yeah.
This was so eye-rolling. Just the connection to his backstory was like painful to
super forced.
Yeah, because that's not in the other version. The Dominion doesn't have any of that like connective crap. It has the backstory with the SS officer, but it's otherwise like all the connections to it in his present day are completely different.
And I'll be honest, I did kind of find that like little backstory snippet kind of interesting. But yeah, definitely more in Dominion than beginning. Like, the beginning it feels like there's not much point. That it's just like like very quickly a thing or whatever, and then but Dominion actually felt like it had more like resonance, and I guess maybe because it kind of fleshed it out, and there's no dumb bullshit like trying to tie it all together.
Well, there's a scene in the beginning where he's like remembering snippets of it and we're seeing parts of it, and he starts to just sort of like wrecking the room thinking about it, and it's really over the top and like overly dramatic. But yeah, the backstory is that, well, he was a priest in presumably Holland, because that's where he's from, where the Nazis were there, and he was basically the SS officer was really cruel and forced him to pick like 10 people that they were going to kill, and this is kind of the event that made him lose faith in God, is that this horrific tragedy he went through. And he connects with the nurse character because she is a survivor from the Holocaust. She's got like a number on her arm that he sees early on, and that's in both versions. Like in both versions, she has kind of that element to her backstory. It varies wildly beyond that though. So in the beginning, like, we see flashes of this SS officer a few times, and then the big twist is that she mentioned earlier on that she came here with a husband, but her husband went mad after they got close to this church because it's got evil in it and it spreads, because that's the whole premise of the movie. And he died, and the big twist is that her husband was the SS officer that forced Father Merrin to do this years ago. And
what are the odds?
So that's terrible for a start, because it's just such a forced connection. The other problem with this that really bugged me is that the twist here is that she's been possessed the entire time since her husband died, meaning that she's been around this camp with all these locals for years. However, as far as the movie tells us, nothing bad has really happened recently. Obviously, they mentioned stuff happening like 50 years ago when stuff was coming from the church, but nothing bad's happened recently until they started digging again. So what was Pazuzu just hanging out in this nurse and just chilling for
That's a great question.
for years, and then just decided to go all Exorcist on us?
Yeah.
Like, because that's the thing. See, when they reveal that she's possessed, she goes full Linda Blair, like, makeup, and starts talking like the first movie.
Yeah, that was another thing that I thought like was. I mean, I understand like the Hollywood thinking behind it, where it's like, oh no, like it has to look and sound like, Linda Blair from the original, but it's like, no, it doesn't. Like, it's a completely different person that's possessed. Like, it's. Even if it's like the same demon or whatever, it's like it's okay that it doesn't have to like look and sound exactly the same. But yeah, they obviously are very consciously trying to like evoke that imagery and stuff from the first movie.
And that's before you even get to like the awful CG of her like doing gymnastics off of the cross, and then like when Father Merrin's doing the exorcism in the caves beneath the church. She's like floating towards them, and sometimes it's a CG model of her and not her, depending if it's a close-up or not. And it just, everything about it is goofy and silly, and you can't take any of it seriously.
See, I liked all this stuff, like not in a serious way, but like it was at least entertaining to me in like a so dumb it's kind of stupid a way that I'm like,
well, no, do I know why you kind of like this, Tim? Because this was veering more into Evil Dead. This was veering more to
totally,
Deadite.
100%, yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah, it does feel more Deadite than like a possessed exorcism person. But
yeah, I mean, no, Deadites are still possessed people, but
right,
but a very different style to what the Exorcist portrays them as. But I was definitely getting vibes of that, because even when like she's on top of him saying, "What, don't you want to F me anymore, Father Merrin?" I'm like, this sounds like a Deadite. Even, I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, Linda Blair did say raunchy things. She did, but the way she was kind of like straddling him just made me think a lot more like a Deadite in Evil Dead. But then you've also got the thing where she's like doing like weird gymnastics, and it's like a CG character doing them, and it looks horrendous. Like all of this was like, so this entire
like Attack of the Clones has already come out, so we all had like Yoda fever. Like we loved anything where like a little guy in a cave was jumping around. Like
yeah, I can't even tell you how much this third act was like just painful to experience. It was terrible.
I think it was this was the one where like she's running down that like long tunnel while he's like saying the exorcism and stuff like that. I actually kind of like the visual of that. Like I thought that was kind of interesting.
I love how in both movies, like he whips out the Bible, and to be fair, it's only in Dominion he puts the clothes on. In the beginning, he just kind of picks up the Bible after the younger priest dies and kind of like baptizes himself quickly, and is like, okay, forgive me, Father, for growing skeptical. Like I need your strength now, blah blah blah. He goes and does his thing. Whereas in Dominion, there's actually the scene like a superhero movie where he pulls out, or actually even better, like a detective movie where he pulls out the badge and gun, and he's like, "All right, one more time," kind of thing. So the plot in Dominion with like who's possessed is completely different. It's the young disabled man, Chechi, I want to say his name was, who like miraculously gets better. But obviously it's kind of hinting that it's because he's possessed, and sure enough he does start to act more possessed and eventually starts acting out, and it's him that obviously has to be exorcised at the end of the movie. In Dominion, the nurse character does not be revealed to be possessed, and she is never evil. She is just like a supporting character.
Yeah, and she definitely more of a supporting character versus like the nurse in the beginning, which felt like like the second lead almost. Like the nurse in Dominion really didn't have much to do.
It does still hint at a romance or an attraction in Dominion, but in beginning they straight up like make out in one scene. So it's like okay. So very different between the two. There is like a period.
It's just so funny to like think of like the WB execs like watching Dominion as being like, why is this Exorcist prequel not sexy enough? Like, let's like.
Stellan Skarsgård in the Exorcist prequel is what I'm looking for my sexy times. There is like a period in the middle of Dominion where Chechi does look a little Linda Blair-esque in the makeup, but by the time we get to the third act, he kind of like, they go for something different where he's like completely bald and completely clean shaven, and there's a very different look to him than any of the Exorcist victims, if you will, in the previous movies.
This stuff is interesting. I mean, it's hard to say there's much about like either of these movies that I love or anything, but again, like this kind of stuff in Dominion is where I start to perk up a little bit and get like, okay, let's see where this is going.
I mean, I don't really like it, particularly the more it goes on. I didn't really like Dominion that much either, but I think at least with Dominion, it feels like a noble failure in that it felt like someone like was trying to make a movie, and I don't think it really works, but it does feel like someone trying to make something, whereas the Renny Harlin one feels like a studio came in and let's do something more generic and more, you know, spooky scenes. Like, I mean, the beginning literally has that trope that I hate where someone has a nightmare and then they'll wake up for it and it's a jump scare, you know? Yeah. We have that moment there. There is a dream sequence in Dominion, but it's very different. It's almost like a David Lynch scene where like, and they don't even really sort of show anyone waking up, so you just kind of get that it's a dream and just kind of like assume it is. But it's like there's a scene where there's like a clock floating, and just like in a room somewhere, and then like there's like a bandaged man. You presume it's Father Merrin bandaged up, but he's kind of like just sort of like crouched down and swaying. And then you see like the face of Pazuzu, which is taken. You know, it's very similar to the quick flashes of him in the original Exorcist. The face with sort of the white paint on it. So like, again, very different things. It did feel like it was trying to do something with Dominion, although I think that was the last time I was really kind of like interested or entertained by Dominion. I think after that point it just kind of became kind of dull. We kind of have to talk about how it deals with the locals. I would say that between the two, the beginning felt more racist to me, but I mean,
for sure,
your opinion may vary on that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, watching them, I would say definitely beginning was a little bit more problematic of the two. But yeah, there was like a lot of stuff that felt like very like, yeah, is this as culturally sensitive as it should be in both movies? And
don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's probably problems in Dominion as well. To this extent, but it was definitely worse than beginning. There was no doubt in my mind. Because don't get me wrong, there's characters in Dominion. Some of the British Army are calling them savages and you know, other things, but it always comes across as the movie's saying these characters are in the wrong for thinking this way. This is them being unsympathetic, and Stellan Skarsgård certainly doesn't feel like he agrees with them. So there's kind of that, and at least in Dominion, like the army came in much earlier into the local like main part of the where the movie's set, and you know, where the buried church is, and very early on, like 2 British soldiers get killed, and what it seems like it happened, we don't get to see a lot of it, but what it seems like it happened is they go into the church to try and steal any valuables, and the demon or whatever has made them go crazy and kill each other. So they find their bodies all sort of like on display, like a big ritual killing, and the army thinks that it's the locals, the natives, that have done this, so they grow really distrusting of them. And it's kind of this idea that Pazuzu or the demon are kind of like making everyone a little crazy, and they're all getting more high strung, and they're giving them reasons to hate each other and things like that. And so there's kind of this inciting incident which kind of explains why the major starts to go a bit more kind of like bigoted and racist and like paranoid. And it actually makes sense when he feels, because he kills like a random woman from the locals like halfway through, and soon after there's a scene where he kills himself because he can't live with it, because he's kind of like, you know, some of his real empathy's coming in. And we see that, like, before the death of the 2 soldiers, he actually gives some of his men into trouble for using racial slurs. But then he does this, and then afterwards he kills himself. So it kind of makes some sense that when he does kill himself. In the beginning, the army came in much later. It's actually the we'll talk about who this guy is in a minute, but there's this like really kind of pervy drunk guy who's like running the dig in the beginning, who's not in Dominion. And it's him that shows up dead on display, but it's solely into the movie, and it's like like why the army like are so mad and like are determined to like sort of like have a reason to wipe out the local quote unquote savages after it out of revenge doesn't feel anywhere nearly as like earned. It feels very forced in the beginning, but the major still commits suicide, and I don't understand why. Like, see, when I was watching the beginning, like this scene came out of nowhere. The only thing I could have assumed in the scene is that because he just sort of takes a gun and puts it in his mouth and kills himself, is that yeah, the demon kind of is making people do crazy stuff again. But it, like, I don't like nothing in The Exorcist like flat out just made other people do like things this extreme.
Right. Yeah.
I certainly don't remember anything like that. So it just comes out of nowhere, and it feels like a shock value moment. Whereas in Dominion, it's not a great story, but at least, you know, he seems to be more sympathetic early on. He then, some of his own men are killed, and that kind of like prods him and makes him a bit crazy, and he kills an innocent person, which kind of neatly thematically ties into like Father Merrin's backstory, where he was forced to pick people for the Nazis to shoot.
Oh, sure.
You know, so there's like a bit of a through line, and it kind of makes a bit more sense. In the Renny Harlin version, he just kind of he comes back into the story way later, reacts heavily to a character that we didn't even really know that he was aware of beyond just he existed, and then kills himself. It feels really forced.
It's like, of all the things that they kept from like Paul Schrader's version, it's like, oh well, yeah, we got to keep the suicide scene in, like, yeah.
Yeah. Because in both versions, the natives are like kind of upset and think evil's spreading, and obviously like the white people like just assume they're being superstitious and sort of look down upon them and stuff like that. But it definitely felt like there was a lot more problematic scenes in the beginning, I would say, and it certainly ends with more bloodshed as well, because in the beginning, the British army and the natives kill each other, like they all die at the end. Stellan Skarsgård comes out of the cave with the young boy that he was, because I think you're led to believe that the young boy might be possessed. We'll talk about who the young boy is in a minute. We'll not even mention that part of the plot. But at the end of the movie, when he's done exorcising the nurse and she dies after that, he comes out and like the thing's been reburied, the church, and like everyone's dead. It's been a massacre. And it's like he's the only one left. So they went for this bombastic ending. Whereas in Dominion, when he's doing the exorcism, we see that people are almost doing bad things on the outside. Like, you know, they're getting ready to fight each other. The nurse who's on the outside in this version of the movie is going to kill herself. Like, we see that all these things are about to happen outside, but because he's able to exorcise Chechi in Dominion, it stops all these bad things from happening. So it's a happier ending, and he actually kind of like helps everyone by, you know, kind of becoming a hero almost. And maybe you could argue that's maybe not suitable for an Exorcist movie. It's a bit too optimistic at the end, but
sure,
you know, I don't know. It fit better to the story they were telling before than I think what happens in the beginning, which is just like misery. Yeah, I guess we have to talk about the kids, who have very different roles in each of the movies. So. Same with the young priest, actually, because he also ties into this. So, in both movies, there's a younger priest that goes with Merrin back to the dig site. In beginning, it's kind of like he's being given a buddy because he's not really with the church, and he's there. So they send a priest with him to sort of represent the church. And
you need a buddy.
In Dominion, it's more like they don't trust him, so they're sending a young priest. But in both, there's a character in the locals who wants to be Christian, and he's got two sons. And the father might be the same actor in both, but the kids, I'm pretty sure, were different actors in each. But the kids in the beginning, one of them gets torn apart with hyenas in a laughably bad scene because of the CG. And then the younger of the two brothers, you think might be possessed. And the film kind of leads you down that path until it reveals the nurse is the one that's actually possessed. And so he's kind of like just this constant like little kid who's maybe in danger, and he's got sort of there with it when the exorcism's happening later on. He's kind of in threat. He's like the one person that Skarsgård actually manages to save by the end of the movie, because everyone else dies. In Dominion, we're introduced to this father and two kids, And it also introduces the idea that this younger priest is going to start a Christian or a Catholic school in this small town. And he's only really got these 2 kids and maybe like one other kid in his like small class to teach, because that's the only kids that have parents who want to turn them Christian. So he's teaching these little kids, and in Dominion, these kids are actually murdered by the locals because they think it's the Christians' fault that this evil's starting to spread from this church that's been dug up. So they actually come in and kill the children and try to kill the younger priest, Father Francis, I think his name is. They try and kill him later on as well. So, like, very, very drastic different roles in each of these movies. Like, they're both, like, this idea of a father and his 2 sons are in both movies, but how they're used and what they do with them in each is completely different. In one, it's like, it's more of a traditional thing where one's kind of used as this, like, oh, you're tugging on your heartstrings because the kid's in danger. He has to save the kid. Whereas in Dominion, it's much darker. It's this thing where this is how much the locals fear this evil, is that they think that this will help dispel it, is by trying to get rid of the Christianity that's in the area, because they see that as the force that's bringing this evil out. To the point where they're willing to kill him. They're willing to kill the 2 kids. They want to kill. There's one other local they kill in Dominion, and I forget exactly off the top of my head when or why, but they definitely killed one other person. And they try to kill the younger priest because they're trying to stop this digging from happening. They think this is spreading the evil. Other than that, I don't know if there's any prominent plot details that I even want to mention.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying before, like on the surface, like it's like there's not really much to the plots. Like they're both basically like, yeah, Father Merrin lost his faith. He goes to this place to, look for these relics at this dig site or whatever, and at some point someone becomes possessed, and then that leads to confrontation with his demon in a cave, which he has to exorcise.
Yeah, the one big difference with the ending, other than who's possessed, and obviously the nurse who's possessed in the beginnings try to straddle him, is making lots of like sexual comments to him, whereas that's not happening in Dominion. But in Dominion, right, the big thing that happens is that the demon like makes him relive that awful memory of when he was forced to like kill, or forced to choose who the Nazis were going to kill, because this SS officer makes him choose. In Dominion, he relives that memory because the demon makes him relive it. Except in this new version, it's like he gives him like, the demons try to like tempt him by giving him what he wants, which is like to change that memory and like actually stand up to the Nazi, which just leads to him and all the people getting killed. Because that in the original version of the dream, or not the dream, sorry, in the original version of the memory that we see at the start of Dominion, we see that the reason all this happens is because, or why he like gives in and chooses 10 people, is because the Nazis say, well, we're just going to kill everyone then. So he then has to choose, and obviously he chooses the older people. He chooses some older men, so that the women and children won't be killed. Like you understand his selection, but it's this awful thing he has to do.
He saves the podcasters though. So.
Oh yes, the podcasters in the 1930s or 40s. Yeah.
Whenever a sacrifice has to be made, always spare the podcasters. They're the real truth tellers.
Of course. Keep us alive. We're important to the world. I agree. But so that's kind of how the demon tries to tempt him, and. That kind of ties into the original Exorcist, and like the demon tries to tempt the priest with your mother, and like try to give him. I mean, obviously it torments him more than anything else, but there is this temptation element to it occasionally. So I kind of got what it was doing there with that. It
seems like it'd be like perfect for a game show, like. Can you resist temptation? Like you just like have like a demon just keep offering you things, and it's up to you to be like, oh, that sounds really good, but I don't know. I probably shouldn't.
I can't believe you just pitched an Exorcist game show. Where someone pretending to be a demon offers you things, and you have to resist, because if you resist, you may get a better reward at the end.
Yeah. Eternal salvation.
Well stuff. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention in Dominion is that at one point to trap out anyone from coming into the church. There's a really dodgy like CG earthquake where 2 CG rocks fall in front of the door, and it looks really bad. And it's just to keep like Father Merrin out for a little while until he's supposed to go in and confront the demon. So there's a little bit of that. So the start of the beginning, we get this like flashback to like 1500 years ago, where there's just this army who are dead, and it's this awful CG shot that pulls back and shows you all this dead army, and there's like one guy left out of this big fight. And we find out later in the movie, and this is something they added in the beginning, is that basically like 4 religious men or something went looking for where Satan fell on Earth to fight Satan, and this battle happened here, and it made everyone go mad and kill each other. So the guy who survived, the one guy who was left, commissioned the building of this church and then immediately wanted it buried. The idea being that the holy ground over the top of this like place where human sacrifices were committed, which is what the cave underneath the church is that the church is there to like, you know, kind of like putting holy water on something. It's there to sort of try and like, you know, dampen the evil with the power of God or whatever, and then they buried it to hide it so that no one would ever come here and no one would ever do anything. So of course the church are determined to dig it up and find some artifacts 1500 years later. But that's the backstory that's presented in the beginning. In Dominion, that never comes up. There's a couple of there is a line of dialogue where he says, "Oh, this is like 1500 years old, but it looks pristine, almost like it was buried right after it was built." But like, there's no backstory where like I think they look at some paintings at one point and maybe they mention something about a battle, but like all of this specific stuff and like actually seeing some of it, none of that's in Dominion.
Which is why Dominion is worse off.
Oh, is it? Is Dominion worse off?
Yeah, I mean that's everything would have clicked if they just included that little tidbit of information.
Now, obviously in Dominion, the locals do like attack people and try to be who they think are related to the evil spirit and are trying to kill them. But one of the things that one of the reasons why I say beginning is a bit more problematic, there's a scene that stuck out in my head where they show up and try and like kind of do their own exorcism for the kid when they think the kid's possessed, and they're all in this pain and they're all chanting and like, you know, it's just that's like one of those scenes that really stuck out to me. Is feeling like a little, I don't know, this is a bit like, oh, we're rating, you know, these locals as you know, this tribe as being this way. It felt very like this was written by a white guy, you know. I kind of had that feeling.
Oh, absolutely. They always feel very much like the other, like, yeah, you know, the like all the white guys there, they are always like portrayed as being kind of normal, where it's like, yeah, like all like the African villagers always seem like, you know, they're very like mystical and magical, and then you have like the whole, you know, kind of like white savior thing where it's like, all right, like, you know, all this crazy stuff is happening, but the only person that can really stop it is like this old white priest, you know. It's like,
what's crazy about it is you would think that the movie in some way could do the thing where, okay, like they seem superstitious and the other characters dismiss them, but in theory, because of what the movie is, it should prove them somewhat right by the end, because they are right. There is an evil spirit, it is coming from that church, and it is doing all these bad things. But you never really get a sense that the other characters are like sort of like, that's never proven to the characters who are doubting them. Like all of them, Merrin, I guess, but everyone else, no one ever like learns that lesson. No one ever. It never feels like the movie actually goes out of its way to saying, "Hey, they were right. We should have been respectful of what they were saying because they were actually right on the money." But it never kind of feels like it makes that point. So it just kind of feels like they're used to be the superstitious, like you know, they're basically a whole tribe of crazy Ralphs. To try and like, you know, it's got a death curse, like, you know, but in a much more vaguely racist manner. It's not even fake. I'm being too kind to it by saying that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It just doesn't really leave like a great taste in your mouth after watching it.
No. And it's not like I'm on the hook for the main story or the romance with Merrin. Yeah. Honestly, you know, if I'm being completely honest here, like, you know, when I was watching Dominion, as much as obviously it was a bit better in some respects, like I was so like bored in the second half of it. Like, I was just kind of waiting for it to end. That yeah, my mind was wandering. It was really hard to focus on it. It was tough watching these two close together. Although the comparison you can make by watching them close together was a little bit more interesting. It's still 4 hours of my life that I'm not getting back, and I never want to watch either of these again. So
Yeah, I feel like this is it for me. Like I can't imagine really wanting to pop them up again anytime soon.
Nah. And it's not even like, I'm trying to think of like something of value it was trying to add, but like during the beginning, especially when there's a scene where Merrin gets angry and he confronts the younger priest, because the younger priest, Francis in Dominion's a lot more he's a lot more likable. He's kind of there in a friendly way, and he's kind of like helping Father Merrin and whatnot, whereas the priest, who seems like he's set in a friendly way in the beginning, turns out to like withholding information, and he knows like some truth about this place. And Merrin gets mad and like puts him up against the wall, and he's like, "Hey, tell me what's really going on here. You know stuff about this place." And he tells him the backstory about the army and like what this place is, and it was buried and blah blah blah. When this scene was happening, I was just sort of thinking to myself, I'm like, you're just kind of like taking away a lot of the mystique of the demon and the Exorcist. And obviously the sequel's kind of, the sequel did that as well, with giving it the name Pazuzu and talking about it a bit more in depth and saying, oh, it was here before. Because when you watch the first Exorcist, it just kind of feels like, oh, they've unearthed this artifact, this statue that's maybe released this demon from wherever it was held, and as a result, it possesses this girl, and we just get everything through the context of that story, that possession in the movie. Whereas here, it's like sort of nailing down all this stuff where it was defeated before, and it feels like it was defeated far easier than it was in The Exorcist. So it feels a little disingenuous in that front. But it also makes the start of The Exorcist feel a bit weird, where, like... So, the start of The Exorcist, Merrin like goes to a dig site and sees that they've unearthed, like, Pazuzu, the statue and stuff. And I'm like... did he come back and help dig this place up when he knew he'd defeated evil that was presumably then contained here?
Very good question.
I don't know. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Admittedly, I'd have to go back and rewatch the start of The Exorcist to see what they actually say, and maybe they'd already dug it up and he just went to check on it afterwards or something. I can't remember, but like my memory was that he was like digging stuff up at the start of that movie.
I believe so. Yeah.
So. I'm kind of baffled by how this kind of like leads into that, and furthermore, this just adds to the ongoing narrative that I have, which is 99% of prequels are trash and feel completely needless.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that. Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, like trying to find the connections between this and like the first movie, they're very tenuous. Like it doesn't really feel like they sat down and thought of a very clever narrative to work around this franchise. It just seems like, someone had a vague memory of like what happens in the beginning, and like, oh yeah, Father Merrin, we can probably send him somewhere in like Africa and like make him kind of archaeologist like that's about right, like, and then I don't know. I mean, I guess that's naturally where you would go with a prequel, but. Again, like, who's like really excited for that? Like, who watches The Exorcist like, oh, this is great, but I really want to know what like Father Merrin was doing like 30, 40 years ago, and in Africa.
Yeah, like doing the Magneto thing where you're giving him some backstory, like in World War II or whatever. Like, it's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's like. It's not like when I was watching The Exorcist, I'm like, oh, we need more backstory for this guy. Like, we need to explore what makes him tick and what made him the man he is today. Like, I never, felt that. So it feels very tacked on. And, Exorcist 2 also feels very tacked on. I mean, 3 doesn't feel needed by any means, but it does feel like at least there was an idea. Like, I was like, okay, how could we do more with this? And it's the idea that the demon, is possessing people and murdering them kind of thing. Or even a demon, it's more of a serial killer that's the demon's helping out, I suppose. But, like, there's at least a concept there, which is why I think inherently, well, sequels can be very bad, and Exorcist 2 proves that sequels can be very, very bad. There is a chance that you can sort of take something in a new direction with a sequel, Whereas with a prequel, you're locked into this idea that you're building up to what the first movie was. So if you do deviate too much, it just feels like it doesn't fit, and that's unsatisfying. If you are locked hard into just fitting into what the first movie is going to be, it feels just like you're going through the motions and nothing well, what's the point of doing this? We're not like really evoking anything here. So I think prequels usually are just a lose-lose for me. And then the other thing about prequels that I don't hate, which I don't know if this is that guilty of that, but it's the over like referencing of things that are going to be in the first, like, you know, the wink wink, here's some foreshadowing of this line or this moment or this object, or that's why he's called Han Solo, you know, that bullshit.
Yeah.
So, you know, so if you're not Better Call Saul, I don't know what prequels are worth having, but
I mean, luckily with these ones, I feel like there's not like a ton of those like winky nods, like other than
I agree.
some of the like, you know, again, some of the possessed people maybe looking or sounding like Linda Blair. But I mean, to be fair though, it's like, how would you even do that with like, you know, The Exorcist? Like, it's not like there's a ton of like, you know, I mean, there's like iconic lines and stuff, but it would just be like very weird and out of place to like, you know, reference those early on or something.
It would be, well, yeah, it would be put in some lines of dialogue that pop up later. It would maybe be like, we'd hear about like Reagan's grandmother or something. We'd meet her and we'd like, oh, your last name's McNeil. Oh, it's Reagan's grandmother. So we've
like,
got a connection.
It's like, yeah, like luckily it's so far in the past that they couldn't do this, but you could totally see like a prequel where like it ends with him getting a call from like, you know, the younger priest being like, you know, we have this case I think you'd be interested in, and like, you know, it's like, oh, I'm on it, and then it just ends there or something.
We've got a case we think you'd be interested in. Shubla Bell starts to play.
Yeah.
If anything, I'm shocked because the Dominion ends with like Father Merrin like saying goodbye to the nurse and walking away, and like the dust cloud, which by the way, the beginning had like a big CGI like sandstorm, which really was terrible. But yeah, he walks away into sort of like the sand that's sort of like rising up, and he kind of like walks out into the mist almost. I was shocked that Tubular Bells didn't start playing as he was walking off to go be Super Priest.
Yeah, like that's like one of the most iconic and easiest things that you can reference, that it's kind of shocking that they didn't have something like that.
I kind of respect the restraint, I suppose.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they were told they couldn't because it is technically copyright music. So maybe it was like, no, we're not paying for that again. Especially in Dominion.
We already made 2 movies. Like, we can't.
Yeah,
we can't afford anything else.
We're not paying for any more of this. So, yeah. Kind of interesting because it's effectively 2 movies based on the same material, with the different scripts, different directors, and just so watching how different they are and like analyzing the small things that are different versus the big things, just because we have different writers and directors, is kind of fascinating from a movie making perspective. It's very unique, and the closest thing I can think of to compare it to is like the original Dracula movie. I don't know if you've ever watched the Spanish version. That's
not yet, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, I've not watched it, but basically the way that worked is that when they were making Dracula for the 1931 movie, the American movie would shoot during the day, and then because they wanted a Spanish version, they had a different director, a different cast, a different crew come in and use the same sets at night. So like the American movie would shoot throughout the day, and then the Spanish version would shoot like the night shift of the same scenes. So it would do all the same scenes again. And I've not watched it, but apparently it is slightly better directed and there's like more interesting camera moves. But you lose Bela Lugosi, so the actor playing Dracula is much worse. So like, but that's the only thing I can think of where like 2 versions of the same movie were made by different people. And it's not like a remake that was made, you know, later, because that feels different, because different culture, different time, you know, different you know, styles have changed, and it's, you know, this is like 2 different people at effectively the same time, right? Obviously they were separated by a year or maybe like half a year or whatever, but in the same era, 2 people making the same movie, and just how different they are is very interesting. But neither one's that good. Like even Dominion's only just mediocre at best.
Yeah.
So,
I I'm trying to think if I can think of any other examples. I mean, obviously, like Justice League is, the big one from recent memory,
but even that's still just a different cut, though. Like a lot of the footage is still the same, It's still a lot of the same scenes are still used.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Whereas this is not all the scenes were shot again.
It's interesting to talk about and to think about,
but not to watch.
Just not really, not to watch.
That's the big problem. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm good. I think I'm done. Yeah. On the upside, we could spend most of our time comparing them. I didn't have to like pretend to like be interested in the beginning. It would have been super fun to like do like a beat by beat breakdown of the plot or something. No, it's a pretty dull movie, to be honest. I mean, on you go.
I mean, well, until potentially later this year. That's us for Exorcist.
True. Yeah.
Unless maybe I can coerce you into doing Repossessed, but
you could try if you want.
I consider that a quasi sequel. Linda Blair is in it.
Yeah. Also Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. I mean, I like Naked Gun as much as the next person, though, so I'm not necessarily against it.
I remember liking it as a kid, but yeah, that was a long time ago.
So there's meant to be a new Exorcist, which I guess is Exorcist 5. Because while technically these are two movies, they're kind of both Exorcist 4. They're both that. Because they're the same bare bones and then everything else on top is different, they still kind of feel like two versions of the same movie, even though they are directed by different people, even though there are all these differences. And we felt the need to watch both for this review. Whereas if it was, if there was like an extended cut of the same movie where like one version's 5 minutes longer, we normally wouldn't watch both versions. We just, we'll watch one and we'll talk about it. Sometimes one of us will watch one and one of us will watch the other. We don't usually decide that. We don't coordinate that. It just happens because that's the version either one of us has access to. But this is a very specific case where it was like, no, we need to watch both of these because they are very different. So, yeah. So I guess we'll rate the movies, and I guess we'll do each of them individually because they are a little different in quality. So... Go on, Tim. Rate Beginning and Dominion.
I mean, I think I'll keep it pretty simple. I think Beginning 3, Dominion 3.5. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that sounds like a little bit harsh. There's, like, I guess there's some like okay stuff. Like, I think Skarsgård does a decent job. I do like both directors generally. Like I mean, they're very different from each other, but I mean, I like Renny Harlin. I do think makes usually fun movies. I guess you kind of expect
I don't think he's
schlockier stuff from him, but
I don't think he's right for an Exorcist movie is the thing.
No,
he is more of a sort of popcorn Hollywood, Die Hard 2, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Deep Blue Sea. He makes sometimes a fun popcorn movie that is very different to like what you want from an Exorcist.
Yeah, but I mean, really, it's just it's just unfortunate because I think they're just both very dull. They both suffer from the time period. Just bad CGI, bad tropes. I guess I'm mostly talking about the beginning, but Dominion's not that much better. And I might be a little harsher on Dominion just because like watching them so close back to back, like just the idea of like having to watch two movies that you're not really super excited for back to back versus maybe if I watched Dominion on its own, like after I had the taste of the beginning out of my mouth, maybe I wouldn't be as harsh. But yeah, still, there you go. Yeah, Dominion's slightly better, but not like by a mile. Unfortunately, it's still dull, and it's a shame because from what you were saying, like with like the studio and stuff, it sounds like maybe that a lot of that wasn't Schrader's fault. Like maybe if he had the time and the money and stuff from the like studio from the get-go, maybe it could have looked a little nicer, had, stuff like, you talk about like music and stuff, like, stuff that could have made it stand out more. But as is, there it goes for me. 3 for beginning, 3.5 for Dominion.
I agree with the 3 on beginning. I think Dominion's maybe a bit more than a 3.5. It feels like it feels a bit more restrained. It feels a bit more competently kind of thought out in terms of its direction at the very least. So I think I'm willing to go up to maybe a 4.5 on that. I think the story's still kind of dull and it kind of loses me as it goes on. But I think that's more towards the middling territory, maybe just slightly under it. Whereas the beginning is just is a trash movie. Like, I was even thinking maybe even dipping under a 3, to be honest. But I'll go 3. I'll be generous and give it a 3 out of 10. But yeah, so yeah, I can't recommend either version. I put off them because I didn't think I would like them for all these years, and lo and behold, I did not. It was kind of a painful experience, and I'm not saying we'll never do 2 movies in one episode again, but this was not a pleasant 4 hours of viewing. I'll say that much. So, yeah, I guess that about does it. That's The Exorcist 4 and 4.5. So, we'll see how the new one from Blumhouse shapes up. I don't know what to expect from it. But it's apparently coming out in October, so if it does come out, we'll do it when it comes out. Tim should be back by then from paternity leave, so we should be able to dive in if and when it hits.
Yeah, I'm not super looking forward to it, but I guess like any big franchise coming back, I must say I'm slightly intrigued.
Morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, and obviously it's from David Gordon Green, who did the new Halloween movies, and it's like, okay, he's done with his new Halloween trilogy, so now he's going to start doing Exorcist movies. Maybe he'll fit better with that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because we generally didn't really like what he did with the Halloween movies, except for some of the stuff in Halloween Ends. But Halloween is such a different type of horror movie than The Exorcist that it's like, okay, well, maybe his style would work more. I don't know.
Yeah, I really don't know. But anywho, that's our thoughts on the Exorcist prequels, with a new one coming this year. So actually, just a little behind the curtain here. This is the last episode we're recording before Tim goes on his break. There is a chance we might make a couple of special recordings on your sabbatical for some big releases, but it's only a maybe, so we won't say which ones, just in case it doesn't happen. Anything obviously big that comes out that we don't get to while Tim's away, obviously we'll catch up. That'll basically be like October probably this year. We'll just be catching up on all the movies we missed.
Or my sub Connor will come in to pinch it for it.
No, he's not Screams After Midnight material. I mean, that's not happening. Yeah. Besides, I don't think he's seen all the relevant movies for some of these big sequels coming out.
Well, listen, I don't want anyone that's going to come in that's going to make me look bad. I got to get someone that's like, yeah.
Oh, I see your plan. Yes. Connor will come in and everyone's going to be begging for you to come back. Like, oh, get Tim back. This Connor's terrible. No. So, yes. So I'm telling you this because if there's a little gap in episodes after this one, which there could be a little one, we've done our best to bank as many episodes as we can for Tim being away. I suspect there might be a month or two without episodes before Tim's back recording again, but it shouldn't be too long. Certainly, if not before then, I think October is probably a good estimate for Tim's return. So,
the siren call of Halloween will always draw me back.
Yeah. So, yeah. So we'll see you soon. Hopefully you've been enjoying the episodes. Yeah. So, yeah. What do I usually say at the end of these? Oh yeah, if you want to support the content, head over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And you can support us for any amount per month, but obviously you get the back catalogue of bonus episodes and even more streams. Those will be coming back when Tim does as well, of course. So go and check out all that stuff, and you can support us on YouTube by liking, subscribing, dinging the bell for notifications. All those things are free, so please do them, and maybe share us with your horror-loving friends. So yeah, get us at Screams Midnight for Twitter. I guess that's about it. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, and we will see you next time.